You just completed a new study looking at what happens when criminals face armed resistance from citizens. And it really is a real life account of the impact of gun ownership on crime.
Yes.
What prompted you to do this?
Back in 2003, I got into a little bit of a email exchange with a professor at Stanford Law School who was insisting that, the actual number of defensive gun uses in America is really greatly overstated, he insisted. He told me that, the number of times when a person uses a gun in self-defense where they really needed a gun, as opposed to, they had a gun and it, might have somewhat assisted. He said that's really quite rare. He said he doubted there was even one genuinely defensive gun use by a civilian in the United States every 10 years.
Oh my gosh!
And
What newspapers what does he read?
Well, that was the interesting thing. Is I said to myself, wait a minute, I've seen a lot more news accounts than that just in the last month or two. And so what I started to do was that for a period of about 7 years, I directed a project where we gathered news accounts from usually local news sources, TV stations, local newspapers, and that sort of thing, sometimes press releases from police departments where civilians had used guns in self-defense. And the idea was, one, this will demonstrate that, in fact, these really are not, once every 10 years sort of events, but it will also provide us with information that makes it possible to get a little bit of an idea of what sort of people are using guns in self-defense and, what would the likely outcomes have been if they had not.
Yeah. And, we often do, I can tell you on our daily basis almost, what we call the armed citizen file. And,
Right.
We talk to people and they'll tell you right out front, without that firearm, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be here talking to you because the police couldn't get there fast enough. 911 and the police do all they can, but they can't be everywhere all the time. And then you've got the stories where you've got people who, they just brandish their gun. They don't even fire a shot.
Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that I certainly found as a result of this 4,699 studies that individual incidents that we gathered, is that these were very often situations where merely the discovery that the victim was in a position to shoot back was enough to cause criminals to back away and say, this really is not a wise thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's one particular incident that received very little attention outside of the Atlanta area in 2009. Two masked men broke into a home in College Park, Georgia. There was a birthday party in progress there. There were 10 people inside, most of them college students, and the masked men proceeded to separate the men into one room and the women into another room. And at that point, one of the intruders started to count how many bullets he had. And he asked the other guy if he had enough bullets. And he said, yeah, he had enough bullets. You can figure out what was going to happen. There were going to be no witnesses. And as it happened, one of the students who was there, one of the college students, actually had a gun in his backpack. And he managed to shoot the intruder that had taken all the men into one room, ran into the other room and found the other intruder was in the process of raping one of the women. And basically yelled, "Get down," and shot the intruder, who then went out through a window. Think of what the results would have been if that student had not been armed. It would have been horrendous.
Yeah. And you hear about it all of the time. And speaking about students with firearms, you had a very important part of the study concerning campus carry. And that is such a huge issue right now in legislatures and college campuses across this country. And what you found out is that the rate of crime on college campuses is rising. At the same time, overall crime rates are in decline. In Colorado, a perfect example. At Colorado State University, they decided to allow concealed carry, so what happened? Crime goes down. The University of Colorado, they're going to ban them, crime goes up.
Yeah, and it's really hard to tell how much of the increase in violent crime on college campuses is because of the fact that we have a lot more students attending college than was the case even 30 years ago. I teach history at College of Western Idaho, and There are students who 30 years ago would have gone into some sort of blue-collar occupation. Now they're in college. So we have a lot more students than we used to. But the other thing, too, that's sort of interesting is that a lot of what has driven the creation of groups like Students for Concealed Carry on campus is it's not primarily concerned about ordinary crimes, the ordinary criminal activities that we worry about. It's really the mass murder incidents that have become increasingly a part of American life from the 1980s onward. That is one of the things that provokes considerable feeling among not only students but also even a number of us that teach on college campuses that the current rules are really not a particularly good idea.
Yeah. I mean, you really need to get this study in the hands of state lawmakers and members of Congress who are always, fighting this whole gun ban versus not having a gun ban. And I mean, your study shows gun bans backfire, just like we already know.
Yes, and the thing that's sort of interesting about this with respect to college campuses is that these bans are actually surprisingly recent. An awful lot of colleges had no particular rules on this subject until really the 1980s and 1990s. For example, when I was going to college in California, concealed weapon permit was sufficient to carry on campus. Partly it was because permits were not readily issued, but they didn't have any special rules for that. Now a lot of schools have this delusion that if they put a no weapons on campus rule in the student handbook, that someone who's planning to come on campus and murder 30 or 40 people is going to somehow be deterred by that.
Yeah.
For some reason, it doesn't seem to work.
Well, we've seen it play out. We know what happened at Virginia Tech. And, there's so many other tragic examples of that. But when you look at this study, I mean, what do you want people to take away from this?
That the vast majority of Americans are surprisingly responsible and confident with the use of firearms for self-defense. We do record the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are incidents where you scratch your head and say, this was technically a legal use, but probably you should not have done so. But overwhelmingly, American gun owners show a tremendous amount of sense and appropriate use of firearms. These are generally incidents where you've got someone trying to smash in your door with an axe. It's probably a pretty good guess that shooting someone who's trying to smash into your house with an axe is probably not coming in to have a polite conversation with you.
Yeah. And as you pointed out about that professor in California not knowing about the number of cases that we have where people use a firearm to protect themselves on a regular basis. But the media really doesn't cover it. I mean, you can read it in the newspaper, but you don't hear about it very often on the TV, whether it's a local affiliate or the networks, unless it's a major story.
Yeah, that's the other thing that was interesting as we were doing this study was how much coverage there were of these things in local newspapers and on local TV stations, but very, very seldom do these make national news.
Right.
And when they do, it's usually because there's some dramatic or heart-rending aspect to it. This woman back in late December who opened fire on the two guys who were trying to kick in her door. She was 18 years old with a 3-month son inside.
Right.
That got attention because it was the sort of human interest story you would expect.
Right, that was in Blanchard, Oklahoma.
Right.
Right.
But there's a tremendous number of these other incidents. By just about all surveys, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of defensive gun uses per year in the United States.
Yeah, well, a good study, I'll tell you that.
I think that's a pretty good description of it. You can download the study as a PDF from the Cato website, and they're also working on a map that includes examples of these incidents around the country that people may find interesting to look at.
Yeah.